There comes a moment when empaths undergo such a profound inner transformation that it redefines their entire way of relating to the world. It's not just an internal shift, it's energetic, relational, and unmistakable to everyone around them. Those who once sought them out to manipulate, drain, or control suddenly seem unable to access them. It's not because the empath has grown cold or emotionally walled off. On the contrary, they've become more emotionally attuned, more present, more truly empathic. But now, there's an inner solidity that wasn't there before. A kind of invisible boundary that, although intangible, commands respect. This transformation is best understood through the lens of Carl Jung's psychological framework, specifically his idea of the shield, or what could be more formally termed the development of the ego-self axis. For Jung, this wasn't a defense mechanism in the traditional sense. It was the result of deep psychological integration, a form of maturity in which the individual no longer operates through projection, reaction, or self-abandonment. The shift can't be faked. People sense it on an intuitive level. Manipulators find that their usual tactics fall flat. Energy drainers discover that their emotional hooks can no longer latch on. It's not that the empath has become indifferent. They've simply become energetically unavailable for unconscious dynamics. What they've done, essentially, is complete a crucial psychological journey, one Jung referred to as individuation. Carl Gustav Jung, whose career spanned from 1875 to 1961, dedicated his life to studying the psyche, especially the parts of it most people ignore or suppress. Central to his work was the concept of individuation, the process of becoming a fully developed psychological individual, distinct from collective norms and projections. This wasn't about isolation, it was about wholeness. His seminal works, including Archetypes and The Collective Unconscious, Psychology and Alchemy, and Memories, Dreams, Reflections, all detail various aspects of this process. Jung's own life serves as a vivid example of the necessity of developing such a shield. Between 1913 and 1917, he went through a deep psychological descent after parting ways with Freud. Rather than shutting down or pathologizing the strange images and voices he encountered, Jung opened himself to them, intentionally entering the unconscious to better understand its contents. He described it as an endless torrent of visions, which he navigated not by avoiding them, but by striving to remain conscious within them. He feared losing his grip on reality, but instead of suppressing his sensitivity, he forged a stronger sense of self capable of holding those overwhelming experiences. That's the same kind of inner architecture empaths must build. Many sensitive people grow up in environments where they had to tune into others' emotional states just to stay safe or maintain a sense of stability. Hyper-awareness becomes second nature, but in the process, they often sacrifice their own boundaries. Their identity gets built around emotional service and attunement, rather than autonomy and differentiation. Most empaths don't choose their sensitivity. It evolves out of necessity. Maybe they had a parent whose moods swung violently and unpredictably, forcing them to read emotional cues to avoid harm. Maybe they grew up in instability and learned that emotional attunement was their way of staying grounded. Or perhaps they were only valued when they were meeting other people's needs. Whatever the origin, they developed an extraordinary capacity to sense and respond to others, but not to themselves. And crucially, they often lacked the chance to form strong, healthy ego boundaries. Over time, this hyper-empathic adaptation becomes a double-edged sword. On one hand, it makes the empath remarkably compassionate and perceptive. On the other, it leaves them overwhelmed, depleted, and susceptible to manipulation. They merge with others' feelings so seamlessly that they lose track of their own. Their energy gets hijacked, not through malice necessarily, but because their psychological structure is too porous to keep external influences at bay. This is where Jung's concept of the shield comes in. It's not a wall of detachment. It's not emotional suppression or forced stoicism. It's a deep psychological strength that allows you to stay open without being overtaken. Jung taught that the key problem wasn't sensitivity. It was the underdevelopment of the ego combined with unexamined shadow material. Together, these create cracks in the psychological framework that allow external psychic content to seep in. So how do you build the shield? According to Jungian psychology, it involves a set of developmental operations that forge a coherent, resilient sense of self. The first of these is ego consciousness, knowing who you are across different contexts and relationships. It's not just about having opinions or a personality. It's about forming an integrated identity that doesn't shift or dissolve depending on who you're with. For empaths, this is no small feat. They often become emotional chameleons, adapting their energy and behavior based on what others need or expect. This feels like empathy, but it's actually a sign of a fragile ego. When your sense of I is contingent upon external validation or emotional harmony, you're not anchored in yourself. You're performing for others. Jung emphasized that ego consciousness comes from withdrawing projections and separating from collective identifications. This means learning to distinguish your real values, preferences, and needs from those imposed by family, culture, or the emotional demands of others. It's about being able to say with confidence, "This is what I value. This is what I need. This is who I am." And then living from that center, even when others don't approve. The practice begins with rigorous self-inquiry. Journaling, paying attention to your gut reactions before you censor them, and noticing when you're slipping into performance mode are crucial. Every day ask yourself, what do I want right now? What am I feeling that I'm not expressing? Where am I compromising my values to please someone else? These questions create the inner clarity that forms the foundation of the shield. Without ego consciousness, boundaries are impossible because you don't know where you end and others begin. The second major component of Jung's shield is shadow integration, a practice that's particularly vital for empaths. The shadow, in Jungian terms, refers to all the parts of ourselves that we reject, suppress, or deny. And for empaths, this shadow often includes the very traits they see as incompatible with being a good person. Things like selfishness, anger, indifference, and assertiveness often get cast out of an empath's identity early in life. These qualities seem to contradict the self-image of being nurturing, kind, and emotionally available. But pushing them into the unconscious doesn't make them disappear. In fact, it makes them dangerous. What's repressed gets projected, and worse, it creates vulnerabilities in the psyche that others, especially manipulators, can unconsciously exploit. Jung once wrote, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. It's not easy work. It demands that you look at the parts of yourself you'd rather not admit exist. But it's essential for becoming whole and untouchable. Because once you've acknowledged your inner aggressor, your inner manipulator, your own capacity for self-serving behavior, those same energies can no longer be used against you." Let's say someone tries to guilt trip you. If you've done your shadow work and accepted your own capacity for guilt and manipulation, you'll spot it instantly. You won't collapse into apology or over-explaining. You'll be able to say, "I see what's happening here," and step back. Not because you're hardened, but because you're clear. The process of integrating the shadow begins with identifying what triggers you in others. Pay attention to intense emotional reactions, disproportionate anger, judgment, or disgust. Those are often reflections of something in your own shadow. Make a list. Who irritates or upsets you the most, and why? Then ask the tough question. Do I have this capacity too? The honest answer will always be yes, because you're human. From there, get curious. What purpose does that negative trait serve? Selfishness can protect your energy. Aggression can assert a boundary. Even manipulation may have evolved as a survival tactic. These aren't inherently bad, they're tools. And when you stop pretending you don't possess them, you gain the power to choose how and when to use them consciously, rather than being ruled by them unconsciously. Safe spaces are essential for this work. Journaling helps give voice to thoughts you might be ashamed of. Physical movement or creative expression lets you discharge shadow energy in constructive ways. Therapy can offer a judgment-free zone to unpack these pieces with guidance. Jung himself used a technique he called active imagination, engaging in literal dialogue with inner shadow figures to find out what they needed and what roles they played. When you stop disowning the darker aspects of yourself, they stop running your life from the shadows. More importantly, others can no longer hook into those blind spots and control you. Shadow integration creates solidity. It makes you whole, and wholeness is the essence of the shield. With ego consciousness and shadow integration forming the foundation, the third critical element of Jung's shield is the ego-self axis, the dynamic relationship between your conscious self, the ego, and your deeper unconscious wholeness, the self. Jung viewed the self not just as a concept, but as the totality of who we are, our conscious awareness, our shadow, our archetypal patterns, and the vast unconscious wisdom that guides our growth. The ego is limited. It sees what's in front of it, navigates the day-to-day, and reacts to circumstances. The self, on the other hand, holds the blueprint for our wholeness. It knows who we are becoming, even when we're still stuck in old patterns. The ego-self axis is the bridge between those two realms, and for empaths, this axis is often either underdeveloped or dangerously unstable. When this connection is absent, empaths swing between two extremes. Either they're cut off from their inner world, living on autopilot and catering to others, or they're overwhelmed by unconscious material, drowning in emotions they can't name or manage. The goal is to build a strong enough ego that can stay in conscious contact with the self without being overwhelmed by it. Jung offered two powerful practices for cultivating this axis: active imagination and dream work. Active imagination is not just daydreaming. It's a deliberate engagement with the images, symbols, and voices that arise from the unconscious. You might sit quietly, close your eyes, and allow a scene or figure to emerge from within you. Then, instead of analyzing or dismissing it, you begin a conversation. Ask it questions. Let it respond. Over time, this dialogue teaches the ego to listen rather than control, to relate rather than suppress. Dreams, similarly, are messages from the self to the ego. Jung saw them as compensatory. They show us what we're missing, where we're out of balance, and what needs our attention. Keeping a dream journal and reflecting on the imagery can reveal patterns you're blind to in waking life. Rather than decode your dreams like a puzzle, Jung advised sitting with them, asking what perspective they might offer that your waking mind hasn't considered. For empaths, these practices are revolutionary. They help you build an inner anchored and ongoing connection to a deeper guidance system that doesn't depend on external validation. You stop looking to others for permission or direction because you're already in conversation with your own inner compass. That's the power of the ego self-axis. It stabilizes you in the midst of emotional intensity. It lets you be sensitive without being swept away. In time, this internal relationship becomes the core of your strength. You become less reactive, more discerning, more creatively engaged with life. Your energy no longer leaks out in 1,000 directions because it's being rooted and replenished from within. That's not just resilience, it's sovereignty. It's the sense of presence others feel when they're around you, even if they can't name it. The fourth cornerstone of Jung's shield principle is individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who you truly are, apart from collective expectations, cultural norms, and other people's projections. Individuation is not rebellion for rebellion's sake. It's the sacred process of separating from borrowed identities so you can live from a place of authenticity and inner authority. For many empaths, this stage is both liberating and terrifying. Much of their identity is often wrapped up in roles like the helper, the caretaker, the one who always understands. These roles may have brought them love, safety, or a sense of purpose, but they can also become prisons. To individuate, you must be willing to disappoint others. You must let go of being who people need you to be, so you can become who you actually are. In The Undiscovered Self, Jung stated, "The individual is the only reality." He wasn't dismissing community. He was emphasizing that without a true self, any contribution to the world is hollow. You can't offer real empathy, creativity, or leadership if you're operating from a false identity that exists only to maintain harmony or gain approval. This is especially true for empaths. Until they individuate, they remain highly permeable to collective forces. A family's dysfunction, a partner's expectations, society's scripts, these can all hijack the empath's energy and obscure their true direction. Jung emphasized that individuation is about becoming psychologically distinct. That might mean making life choices that others label selfish or strange. But those choices, when aligned with the self, become sources of vitality and meaning. So how does individuation look in practice? It might mean ending relationships that no longer support your growth, even if those connections are long-standing. It could involve stepping away from a career that reinforces your empathic identity, but leaves you spiritually starved. It may require solitude, creative risks, or unconventional paths. Most of all, it demands that you listen to your inner voice, even when it conflicts with outer expectations. For the empath, individuation is often the moment they stop rescuing others and start rescuing themselves. They recognize that being kind doesn't mean being available to everyone. They understand that true service doesn't come from self-erasure but from clarity and strength. And they begin to realize that they don't owe anyone an explanation for choosing peace over approval. This level of self-definition is transformative. Once you've individuated, people can no longer define you against your will. Their judgments don't land. Their expectations don't sway you, not because you're indifferent, but because you're rooted in something deeper than external consensus. That's what makes you untouchable. You're no longer a mirror for others to project onto. You've become a presence with your own gravity. The fifth and final component of Jung's psychological shield is the transcendent function, the capacity to hold tension between opposites without prematurely resolving it. In psychological terms, it's the ability to sit with paradox, with discomfort, and with competing truths until something deeper emerges. For empaths, this might be the most challenging skill to master, yet it's also one of the most empowering. Jung believed that the psyche evolves through this tension. When two opposing truths confront each other, say, your need for connection versus your need for solitude, they create a psychological pressure. Most people try to escape this pressure by collapsing into one extreme, either total self-sacrifice or total withdrawal. But Jung taught that true transformation happens when you hold both sides long enough for a third thing to emerge. A new insight, a more integrated way of being. This is where many empaths struggle. They often bounce between extremes, giving too much, then shutting down completely. Being overly attuned to others, then disappearing into isolation. They have trouble holding contradictory experiences like, I care about you, and I need space from you, or I see your pain, and I'm not responsible for fixing it. The inability to hold that tension creates vulnerability. It leaves them emotionally volatile and easy to manipulate. Developing the transcendent function is about staying conscious in the middle of that discomfort. It's about resisting the urge to escape by choosing a side too quickly. Instead, you breathe into the not knowing. You sit with the contradiction. You listen for a deeper resolution that isn't obvious yet, but will emerge if you remain patient. For example, someone close to you might be both incredibly loving and deeply hurtful. The old pattern would be to make them either all good or all bad. But the shielded empath can say, this person brings both value and harm to my life, and navigate the relationship accordingly with boundaries and compassion without having to demonize or idealize. The practice of developing this function involves slowing down your reactions. Notice the discomfort when opposing truths surface. Pay attention to the urge to fix or flee. Instead of choosing, just pause. Let both realities be present. Journal about them. Talk to your therapist. Sleep on them. Over time, you'll notice that this practice makes you more psychologically spacious. You become less reactive, less rigid, more creatively alive. That psychological spaciousness is part of what others begin to feel around you. They sense your groundedness, your ability to navigate complexity. And manipulators? They lose their grip because their tactics depend on emotional extremes, guilt, urgency, idealization, fear. But when you don't swing wildly in response, they have nowhere to land. You've become energetically unhookable. Together, these 5 components, seego consciousness, shadow integration, ego self-axis, individuation, and the transcendent function, create a powerful internal architecture. And when they're fully integrated, the result is undeniable. The empath becomes untouchable. Not because they've armored themselves, but because they've completed themselves. Their empathy now flows from choice, not compulsion. Their presence is strong, clear, and magnetic. To see how all 5 components of Jung's shield work in real life, consider the story of Maya, a lifelong empath who spent years feeling emotionally overwhelmed, energetically drained, and surrounded by people who constantly took from her. For much of her adult life, she thought this was simply her fate. But everything began to change when she started working with a Jungian analyst and committed to a deep psychological process that unfolded over 3 years. The first step for Maya was developing ego consciousness. She began with daily journaling, not just surface-level reflections, but deep questions about her authentic needs, values, and preferences. Through this process, she discovered that many of her behaviors weren't actually aligned with who she was. She realized she valued solitude more than social engagement, depth over small talk, creative work over emotional caretaking. These insights were uncomfortable at first. They clashed with the role she had played for decades. But she kept going, and slowly, she began to live from her actual self, rather than the persona she had constructed to please others. Next came shadow integration. This was some of Maya's most difficult work. She had to confront parts of herself she had long disowned, her capacity to manipulate, to emotionally withdraw, to judge others harshly while wearing a mask of compassion. She realized she had been using her empathy as a form of control, subtly managing other people's emotions to maintain harmony or avoid conflict. Owning these shadow traits didn't make her less empathic. It made her more honest, more self-aware, and far less vulnerable to the manipulative patterns of others. The third piece was cultivating the ego-self axis. Through active imagination and consistent dream work, Maya began to access inner guidance that felt deeper than anything she'd known. She met figures in her inner world, symbols of wisdom, protectors, creative forces, and began having real conversations with them. Her dreams, once chaotic or terrifying, started offering insights and direction. This inner dialogue became a source of strength that didn't rely on anyone else's approval or opinion. She no longer needed others to tell her who she was or what she should do. Then came individuation. This required courage. Maya made choices that shocked those around her. She left her job as a therapist, a role that had come to define her identity, and moved to a remote location to pursue painting. She ended friendships that had been sustained only by her emotional labor. She stopped attending family functions that drained her, even when it caused disappointment. For the first time, she was living from a sense of personal truth, rather than obligation or guilt. And every step she took toward her own path reinforced her inner solidity. Finally, she embraced the transcendent function. Instead of swinging between extremes, connection and isolation, caregiving and burnout, Maya learned to sit with tension. When her mother expressed sadness over their reduced contact, Maya didn't rush to soothe or cut her off. She held both truths. I love my mother, and I need space. When loneliness arose, she didn't flee back into old patterns. She acknowledged the ache and also honored her need for solitude. That ability to hold contradiction without collapsing was the final thread that wove her shield together. By the end of those 3 years, Maya had become energetically unrecognizable. The change wasn't loud or performative. It was subtle but unmistakable. People who once siphoned her emotional energy now found no access point. Friends and acquaintances who previously offloaded their chaos onto her began to either shift toward healthier interactions or quietly drift away. She could sit with someone in deep emotional pain and remain fully present without absorbing their distress or losing herself in it. What had changed wasn't her empathy, it had deepened. What changed was the structure supporting that empathy. She no longer empathized from a place of enmeshment or self-abandonment. She empathized from wholeness, from sovereignty. Her energy was no longer up for grabs. It was hers, rooted in her values, shaped by conscious boundaries, and guided by an internal compass that no longer bent to guilt, manipulation, or unconscious projection. This transformation didn't make Maya distant or cold. If anything, she became warmer, more grounded, and more genuine. People could feel her presence, but they also sensed, sometimes unconsciously, that she was no longer available to be used. Her clarity created a field around her that repelled manipulation, not through resistance, but through resonance. She simply no longer vibrated at the frequency of emotional chaos. And this is the essence of Jung's shield. It doesn't make you less empathic. It refines your empathy into something resilient, intentional, and liberating. You don't have to shut down, harden, or isolate to protect yourself. You build a psychological architecture so integrated and self-aware that others' unconscious material no longer sticks to you. Their projections bounce off. Their guilt trips dissolve. Their drama slides past you without leaving a mark. It's important to emphasize, this kind of transformation is not quick. It's not a weekend retreat or a few self-help books. It's deep, layered psychological work that unfolds over time, often years. It's uncomfortable. It forces you to question everything you've identified with your roles, your persona, your habits of giving and pleasing. But every step brings you closer to freedom. The kind of freedom where you can walk into any room, face any energy, and remain fully yourself. And as a bonus, your empathy becomes even more powerful. Because when it's no longer contaminated by unconscious needs or defenses, it becomes precise, healing, and boundaried. You can care without collapsing. You can give without being emptied. You can connect without losing your core. This is what it means to be untouchable, not invulnerable, not armored, but fully, consciously whole. For anyone walking the path of the empath, the promise of becoming untouchable might feel distant, maybe even impossible. But Jungian psychology lays out a practical, step-by-step path for getting there. This isn't about magical thinking or spiritual bypassing. It's about grounded inner development. It's about doing the real work of becoming whole. So what are the steps you can take today to begin constructing your own shield? First, cultivate ego consciousness. Begin a daily practice of asking yourself, what do I want right now? What do I feel, separate from what others want me to feel? What matters most to me? Journaling helps, but so does honest self-reflection throughout your day. Notice where you're performing, pleasing, or adapting. These are signs you've stepped out of your center. Gently return to yourself. Second, commit to shadow work. When someone provokes a strong emotional reaction in you, languor, judgment, envy, pause and ask, what in them mirrors something I've disowned in myself? Be brutally honest. Then ask, what might this part of me be trying to teach me? Instead of trying to be pure or good, aim to be whole. Your shadow contains qualities you'll need to live a full life: assertiveness, discernment, self-protection, and even righteous anger. Third, develop the ego self-axis through active imagination and dream work. Set aside quiet time regularly to engage with your inner world. Let images arise. Follow them. Speak to them. Dialogue with them. And when dreams surface, don't rush to interpret them. Sit with their symbols. Ask them questions. Over time, your unconscious will begin to guide you in subtle but unmistakable ways. You'll become your own source of wisdom. Fourth, practice individuation. Make choices that align with your inner truth, even when they disappoint others. Maybe it means ending an obligation that depletes you. Maybe it means stepping into a creative pursuit that no one understands. Every time you act from your inner compass, your shield strengthens. You stop being a mirror for others and start becoming a mirror for your deepest self. Fifth, strengthen the transcendent function by sitting with paradox. When life presents you with conflicting truths, resist the urge to resolve them immediately. Can you hold both? Can you sit in discomfort and trust that something deeper will emerge? This capacity will become one of your greatest strengths, because life is full of contradictions. The ability to remain still within them is a mark of inner mastery. This journey isn't about perfection. It's about process. You will falter, regress, and face resistance. But each time you choose clarity over confusion, self-awareness over projection, presence over performance, you're building the shield. And with each layer, you become less reactive, less drained, and more powerful in the truest sense. As you move forward on this path, remember, becoming untouchable doesn't mean cutting off your sensitivity. It means maturing it. It means creating a structure strong enough to contain your sensitivity without being consumed by it. Your empathy no longer flows out of compulsion or identity. It becomes a conscious offering. You don't give because you have to. You give because you choose to, from a place of fullness. And here's the beautiful paradox. The more you build your shield, the more powerful your empathy becomes. Not weaker, stronger. Because it's no longer distorted by fear, guilt, or a need to be needed. It's rooted in self-respect. It becomes precise, clean, and deeply healing.
Philosophy and depth psychology, especially Jungian frameworks, give us the tools to achieve what once seemed out of reach: true energetic sovereignty. You don't have to choose between being sensitive and being safe, between being open and being used. The shield is real. It can be built, and it will change not just how others interact with you, but how you show up for your life. So, if this message resonates with you, don't just reflect, take action. Subscribe to our channel so we can continue exploring the psychology and philosophy that empower empaths and seekers alike. Leave a comment sharing where you are in your journey. What part of the shield are you working on? What breakthroughs or challenges have you faced? Your story might inspire someone else. And most of all, share this video with someone who needs it. Someone who's sensitive, but doesn't yet know they can be strong too. Because sensitivity isn't weakness, it's power, when anchored in wholeness. Thank you for walking this path. The work is hard, but the freedom is real.